Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. Happy holiday weekend. I hope people are watching, Lisa, because I'm sort of thinking everybody's sort of zoning out. I just want to do a little bit of full disclosure here. I've got my two dogs in here in my office, which often happens, but I've got two grandkids out there, and you never know. There might be a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old who pops in. Lisa's with Nick, well known. We're going to have a great conversation, but before we get started, this.
Hey guys, Steve Moran here.
Lisa, welcome to Foresight TV. I think I probably had you on Foresight TV more than just about anybody else. Let's in case somebody doesn't know who you are, let's talk about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I do hope we have people listening in. I know this is, the Friday of Labor Day weekend, and hopefully this is a nice way to wrap up the work week and head into the weekend. So Lisa McCracken, Head of Research and Analytics with NIC, if some people say NIC, National Investment Center for Seniors Housing and Care. And I was thinking back, so I joined NIC almost 2 years ago. It was right before, like 3 weeks before the fall 2023 NIC conference. So, but I've been in the industry, this is my 25th year, just in different research capacities and so forth. So always enjoy talking with you, Steve. I know you always have a lot of good questions, and so I know it's going to be good dialogue.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about, before the show is over, we're going to talk a little bit about the NIC conference that's coming up in just a week. But before we do that, you're always working on such fascinating, interesting stuff. I'd love to know what you're working on, what you're thinking about. I'm sure there's some stuff you can't talk about, and what big themes you're thinking about. And so I'd like to just kind of get an update on that stuff.
So yeah, I'm thinking, okay, how do I narrow this down to a couple key highlights? So we've got a whole team of researchers, analysts that are part of our team that are always producing reports and information and insights. So a couple key things for folks to have on their radar. So I can tease it up, but I can't, have full disclosure. At the conference in the opening session, we're going to be sharing some additional research that builds on really a 2-year set of studies around what we call this sort of macro value senior housing research. And we've done that in partnership with NORC at the University of Chicago. There are times where, we will partner with a third-party group for various reasons to do some research. And so specifically, what just in general, this value senior housing work has really taken a look at, residents that live in our communities. How do they look in terms of hospitalizations, in terms of health outcomes, health status, things of that nature, compared to essentially their equal peers living in the greater community? And there's ways to do that statistically. We've used claims-based data through Medicare and so forth. So, and there's been some really positive findings. The new stuff that's coming out that will be released in the opening session at our fall conference specifically looks at people with NDD. So that's the neurodegenerative disease diagnoses. So those same conversations, right? People that have Alzheimer's, dementia. What do these things look like for those people that are in our settings versus at home on their own with family caregivers or whatever it might be? So that's the one study. And then the other one is what we're calling the value of longer stays, if you will. So that's got some pretty interesting stuff that talks about what the resident journey looks like from really move-in to, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and some pretty insightful positive findings. So that we're excited about. We just released a new case study on the middle market. That forgotten middle income seniors continues to be a high priority for us. We've got some cool stuff coming out this fall around value-based care, ACOs, MA plans, and understanding that. We brought in a new senior principal from CMS in June. And then some cool stuff coming up on penetration rates, affordability at the market level. And I'll leave it there. But we got a lot of stuff in the mix.
I'm going to ask you about one question that just sort of triggered on this. One of the things that we know is that penetration rates vary massively from state to state, and I assume from region to region. I'm sure you've got more granularity than I do. Do you have any sense of why that is? Is it availability? Is it culture? Do you have any thoughts? Have you looked at that?
It was like you teed that question up specifically. Seriously, I mean, so these were questions that we asked ourselves too. And people debate penetration rates, like, are they predictive? Are they more descriptive? What do and don't they tell us? So we tried to tackle that. And it's, okay, so why do certain markets? So our study that's been underway for about a year now looked at assisted living penetration rates and said, why is a Minneapolis through the roof with penetration rates, and somebody like Miami has some of the lowest penetration in the country? So there's ways that we looked at the data and the statistics, but then we also did interviews with folks in those markets and said, what do you think? What are your insights? And so, so we're going to have the sort of that nice big package of research that comes out this fall, Steve. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of things. Sure, you get into things like affordability, labor availability, but there's a lot of cultural things, just even consumer awareness of the concept, and even the history in that market. So if you've got for example, Minneapolis has a deep history going back many, many decades of some like not-for-profits that have been around there for a very long time, and they've grown tremendously. And that market understands it because it's not like a newer thing or concept. So where some others are a little different. So we're doing profiles of markets throughout the country once that full report comes out. But it's been pretty insightful, Steve. There's a little bit of a there's themes, but there's also some different stories at every market. So it does, our national headlines we always put out, there's always the reminder that you got to know your own market.
Okay, I'm going to do one more, and you're going to this is be the one you're going to hate. So we have just sort of the audience, we have this private chat, and we talk about how to use it, and it's like, don't ask me. This is the place for the guests to go. Don't ask me that. This is going to be one of those questions.
Well, last time I was on, I think it was before the election, and you were asking me about political stuff. I was like, oh my gosh. So, yeah. All right, go for it.
Okay, so here's the question I have. Last NIC, virtually every not just NIC, but virtually every conference I've gone to, there are people who get up on the stage, and I'm sure this will be true here, and talk about how we've got this massive need that we can't possibly build enough units. And I remember a time about, it's been probably 9 or 10 years now, where we said exactly the same thing about memory care. And then a year ago, I was at another conference, and they had a panel of capital providers, and they were asked about memory care, and it's like, oh, we hate investing in memory care because the people die so fast, and the occupancy goes down, and it's hard to predict. And so I feel like I'm probably the only skeptic in the whole industry. You have any thoughts on this optimistic projection?
So in terms of the demand that's going to be there?
Yeah, there's sort of the sense that everything's, and of course we know that, not to pick on them specifically, but they've got public data. I mean, Brookdale was still old, low 80s or something like that. I mean, they've got a lot of capacity. I know there are other people who do too.
So it's interesting, on the memory care side of things. So the need is there. I think we would all agree. I mean, the numbers aren't going down. People are living longer. The likelihood of having some type of dementia, is going up. And I think we're seeing even some different. So I think we're going to continue to need those for sure, that support and so forth. And we know, often memory care is, you sometimes have people that are very physically healthy, but obviously they have, as you know, the memory issues. So it's just as much a support for the caregivers as it is for the resident and the older adult and so forth. So, really often you're selling to that family caregiver that's like, I cannot do anymore, and I can't keep my loved one safe.
That's me right now with my 92-year-old stepfather. We have to do, they're all little things, but there are 40 or 50 things we need to do.
Yeah.
And we had some falls, and we just need to do something. So I absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I will tell you what's interesting though, and I think this is one of our challenges as an industry, not just with memory care, but often it's seen as, there's often sometimes guilt that goes along with the family member saying, oh, like I can't do this anymore. So how can we, I think as an industry, we need to change that narrative and have it not be something where I had to put mom or dad somewhere, but feel like they can be healthier there, stimulated, and really candidly can have a better and extended quality of life than maybe they would at home, and so forth. So I think sometimes that there's a psychology there with the caregiver that I think we still need to, as an industry, maybe make some progress with. That's one thing. But I do see too, Steve, there's different models for it. One of the things, we obviously look at a lot of the modern day communities and operators that are out there, but there's this definitely this ecosystem of these smaller boutique-y, and I'm not going to call them the mom and pops because that sounds like the mom, that's a label often for the mom and pop boarding and care homes and so forth. But these are home-like settings that just offer something slightly different than maybe the mainstream memory care. So, and the final thing I will say is I think, and there's great variation. So as you know, people always need to do their homework and visit and see what's a match. But I think for some, it's a secure setting. And it's a secure setting. For others, I think there's an opportunity for the secure environment, but also some vibrancy, and that's in programming and design and really advanced understanding of the disease. I think operators are in different places with that a little bit. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think about that when I think about the memory care.
I know the demographics. I just think that there are a lot of other alternatives, and I think the other thing that you touched on is that we have a lot of statistical data that shows that people live better lives in senior living. Not obviously not 100%. Nothing's ever 100%. But what we don't do very much, and it sort of seems contrary to kind of how NIC where NIC fits into the market space. But I think that we have this massive need to do better storytelling about lives that have been changed and the positive stuff. And I know the stories are there. I have no doubt about that, but it just feels like we're not doing a very good job of collecting those stories and telling those. And I'm seeing more conversation about it, but I don't see much action happening on that. And I don't know whether that's something NIC would ever tackle. I mean, NIC tends to do less of that soft stuff, but maybe that's a place that would be looked at. So,
yeah, I mean, I think, we are sometimes dominated by the headlines that aren't positive, and we're not perfect as an industry. I mean, we're just not. And so, there's always opportunities to learn, but yet, the majority of residents and family members and employees that are day to day in the communities, are very happy and grateful. And I don't know if you recall this about my background, but I got into this industry doing resident satisfaction surveys, talking to family members, doing employee engagement surveys. And I so often heard from residents that said, I should have done this sooner. I didn't realize how lonely I was, or, I wish I would have done this before. And so there's many brilliant things to share about the benefits that are provided. And I think we need to continue to tell our story, because what happens is other people tell it for us, and they're detached from it, and they're pulling those headlines that, really are more isolated.
Yeah. Lori Orloff, who does technology stuff, she and I were talking one day, not publicly, but she had a family member that she helped on a journey through skilled nursing, interestingly enough. And she just sings the praises of the places that her loved one was in. They said they were compassionate and they did such a great job. And she said, why is nobody telling the stories? And of course, it's one of my biggest things. Okay, let's shift to the conference.
Okay.
What are the things, and maybe you've already sort of touched on this, but what are the things you're most excited about? What are the things that people shouldn't miss?
Okay, well, so there's so many things. So first of all, this is our first time in Austin. So that's pretty cool. And actually our spring conference in March is our first time in Nashville. So there are two new cities for NIC, which is good. We were always like the Chicago, DC. And so we're trying some new territory. So we're excited about that. And there's some themes around that, weaved into the conference. To some of our conversation here, I think there's a very interesting session after the opening session where we're going to share some of the NORC studies and process what that means. The session after that is what's called, we're calling it's lessons learned, and it's understanding the past to prepare for our future. And I'm going to read here real quick who is on this panel. It's sort of like the who's who of industry veterans. So our own Bob Kramer, he's going to be the moderator. We've got Stephanie Harris from Arrow Senior Living, John Rios from Chicago Pacific, Stephen Vick with Signature Senior Living, Kurt Ree with RSF Partners, and Leanne Barney with Trilogy. And, I think this is an interesting time, it's for many reasons, but we are in this period of demographics. Definitely, we're seeing it in the demand, the growth. We know population's growing. But we're not growing as an industry. We're very incrementally. Like the second quarter of this year, it was less than 1% year-over-year growth. That's the first time ever we dropped below 1% in the history since Nick Matt's been tracking it. So so before the stars align, and that means the cost of capital, the construction piece, whatever, and we start to get back in this growth cycle, this is an opportunity for us to say, okay, in the maturity and life cycle of our industry, what are some things we've done well and what are some misses? And like, how's the future look a little different than the past? Because, one of the things in particular is all eyes are a little bit on seniors right now, at least from the investment side of things. When you look at groups that have been investing in multifamily and industrial, all these commercial real estate property types, they've never even paid attention to us. Now, like in all these polls and rankings, like we're number one, this little niche industry. And that's a good thing, but you've probably heard the term the tourists before, right? Tourists coming in, not being educated, not having a good experience, and then back out in the company. That's not good for the industry. So they're going to process some of this stuff. And where can we use this period now as a gift to position ourselves for this next growth cycle? So I'm very excited about that one. We are going to hit in some consumer stuff for sure. So we're going to have Joe Coughlin back from MIT Age Lab, and we've got a sort of a non-senior living person whatsoever, a marketing and consumer study expert on the marketing front, taking a look at our industry and a little bit of like, where do we get it wrong in the messaging? Like, where do we need to pivot and so forth? We also have Ryan Marshall with Pulte Homes, which they're a big, residential developer, the active adult. They've done a lot of research studying the market, which is pretty cool. So we also have Frank Cassidy. He's got one of his like 5 label titles, but he's an appointee in the current administration for HUD. He's a senior housing guy, which is so cool. So they're bringing a team. He's going to be speaking to some folks. We've got new money, new models, partnerships, AI, the capital stuff. How do we need to look differently at building and construction, because we can't keep doing the same old and expecting a different output. So risk management, I could go on and on, but I'm excited about the sessions. As we know, there's always so many great meetings. Our meeting spaces are all booked, and there's going to be a lot of conversation or attendance. We're going to be well over 3,000 people. That was a mouthful, so I'll stop, Steve. But
no, that is really good. I'm actually so pumped up about so many of those sessions. So I want to ask you, and then we're going to get into some advice. So what are your days like at NIC? I mean, you're an insider, you work for the organization, but just tell me about what your NIC experience is like, what you like, what's hard.
So, my gosh, a day in the life of Lisa McCracken at NIC. First of all, the team's awesome. It's interesting, and I will share this publicly. So I'm coming up on, again, 2 years at NIC, and prior to that, I had a little over a decade. I was with Ziegler, which was like a family to me. So personally, I feel like I've got my family. I knew my new family. I still have my old family, but I got my new family at NIC. So the team is passionate, committed, hardworking. So I enjoy those interactions, a day-to-day interaction. I'm throughout the day talking to, CEOs, to capital partners, to folks like yourself. So I do get a lot of exposure. I travel a lot too. So I'm out and keeping my eyes and ears to the ground. The one thing I would say, Steve, is I need to be a little bit of a chameleon. And sometimes when I'll hop on a call, I'm like, okay, my last call was around value-based care. This is now about, the consumer. Okay, now we're talking about capital and family offices and pension funds. Okay, now we're talking. So it's like I put on one hat, take off another, put on hat, and so forth. So I'm maybe I'll call myself an advanced generalist. I don't think I'm that watered down, but yet we do, we've got team members that have deep expertise in some of these areas, whether it's active adult or again, ACOs and MA plans and, skilled nursing. So, but to me, I love that. So I think but the thing I would also say too, this is a different NIC than 10 years ago, right? So in that piece, there was the capital piece, the economics, and I pay attention to all of that stuff, but it's that and more. I mean, the capital, and the capital formation and the capital education, that role that NIC plays is not in a vacuum. So, our focus is beyond that. And I think very strategic is to, really trying to help move the industry forward. So, I can't believe it's been almost 2 years, I love it. And I think the different and varied tasks in any given day sort of keep my life interesting.
Yeah, no question about it. I'm sure you must be exhausted by the time you're done. So
some days exhausted, some days energized. So yeah.
And so do you go in with a schedule full of meetings, or you just go in and stuff happens?
No, it's a lot of meetings. So, I try to get some work done early in the morning and in evenings and weekends. And so, it's a little easier for me now as I say I'm an empty nester. We've got even out of college at this point. But so it's a little easier than some other stages of life, but it's a lot. We're in a lot of meetings. And again, I travel a lot. So I do a lot of public speaking. So I think, if our NIC team is just behind our desk every day and, just not being out and integrating with the industry, we're not going to be as connected and do our job the best. So I get out and do a lot of speaking at conferences and with different organizations, which I love.
Okay. So I've got a list of 4 different types of attendees, and I'm sure there are more, but these are sort of 4 that I jotted down. I want you to give your best advice for each category. I'm going to give you all 4 categories.
It sounds like this is like a game show. Okay.
Yeah, it is like a game show, right? So let me give you the list.
Okay.
The first timer, and of course you can break the first timer down.
Okay.
Operators, capital providers, and vendors. And so I'd like you to walk through. We'll start with the first timer. What's your advice to them? And I'm going to probably have some stuff.
Well, we do have a first time attendee session on Monday. Absolutely go to that. First of all, you're going to meet other first timers. And so I definitely recommend that. We also, for registrants, we have this sort of tips and advice. Do that. I mean, just, we're trying to help you navigate because it's a lot. There's a lot of energy, but there's a lot of people. Don't hesitate to introduce yourself if you're sitting in a session or you sit beside somebody for lunch. We've heard many stories of that's how people have started to make connections and so forth. So we do a lot to enable you to be educated and prepared and help maybe have some connections. So go to that first timer networking reception on Monday. Operators. So we've got operators that are the big operators. They've been at NIC probably 15, 20 years and so forth. But then we do get newer ones too. So it's, there's certain sessions that are very operator focused. So I think the operators definitely, I know they've got meetings with capital partners too, which you need to have, but I would think it's helpful to balance some of the sessions and education because it's really, we do a really, really good job and with our conference program committee in pulling those together. So I think about that for operators, try to balance the meetings with some of the sessions and because you're going to walk away with a lot. And I would say the same thing for the capital. The capital folks are there to deploy the capital, to make sure partnerships are intact and, to manage those relationships with their operator partners. But we have sessions that are 100% focused to draw the capital crowd. So whether it's the economic update, some of the lessons learned gets into the capital, new money, new models. We got new money, new structures that we're highlighting. And then vendors. So, the one thing that we allow, there's a way to tap into making, reaching out to people and so forth via the app. I think you got to do that in a delicate way, because particularly the operators sometimes feel like they're getting bombarded, with requests and so forth. So, there's always that outreach, but then there's always that random, you run into somebody and you in the elevator or the reception. Definitely go to the receptions on Monday night and Tuesday night. That's where you often make connections. I'm not saying you're not going to get some meetings, but if you're hounding the heck out of certain people, sometimes that can be a turnoff. So you got to find that delicate balance. That's the business development skill set, right? The final thing I'll say for vendors is you sitting in those sessions is going to help you understand the industry better and really, I think, refine your value proposition. And because you can't come in with this detached solution or partnership that isn't really aligned with what the industry needs or wants. Plus, you sit in sessions and you hear a consistent theme, you might say, that might be an opportunity for us because I think we could help solve that. So that was my long-winded answer for those 4 categories.
Well, and obviously the other thing I would say about vendors and sessions, I know a lot of vendors don't go to sessions because they're just there to meet. A lot of operators go to sessions, right? And so you might find yourself sitting next to that person who won't answer your call, won't answer your email. And so that 5 or 10 minutes before the session starts, that 5 or 10 minutes after it's over can be just such a very powerful networking connection kind of thing. And then I actually have a couple things I want to say relative to this. I think I've been through this. The first is that in truth, there are some jerks there. They're jerks because they're jerks in life.
Well, because there's jerks everywhere.
And that's right, because they're not. Yeah, I actually think senior living has fewer jerks than most other industries.
Most people are respectful, and
most people are so nice. So I would say that there are jerks everywhere. And if somebody does, and the second thing I want to say is sometimes people are just overwhelmed and their heads are in different places. I used to be that person who was just trying to meet everybody, because when I first started going to NIC, I didn't know anybody. And I'd go up and I'd walk up to people, and I would say, I set a goal my first NIC to meet 100 people. And I would say out of that 100, and I did meet 100 people. I don't remember exactly what the number was. I went a little over number. I probably had 5 people who were kind of
a little not as receptive to chat.
We're not as unpleasant. But in reflecting back on it, some of it might have been they have just been overwhelmed. They were exhausted. Yeah. They were in the middle of another conversation. I can remember when this happened 2 or 3 years ago. I had an early morning meeting at breakfast, and I was sitting down, and I had 2 different people who saw me and wanted to come sit down. And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't meet with you." And I did hear, I don't know what that was, but I did hear back from people that I was a little rude to some people. And I would try so hard not to be, but when you're so busy and it just, sometimes people are not rude and it just comes off wrong.
Yeah. So, these are long days for sure. And people are in meetings. One more thing, I'm sitting here and I'm ashamed of myself for not bringing up, given our memory care conversation.
Yep.
So the one good thing of us, I think, more attention on our industry is, there's been a number of different films out there that, whether it was the Ted Danson stuff and he was, undercover living in the retirement community or whatever. But, we do have a movie screening on Tuesday morning, and then we're having a panel with the producer, Sean Kelly from Front Porch, who is where they filmed that. We got somebody from the Alzheimer's Association, Chris Enskall from Ripple. But it's, the movie is Familiar Touch. So if folks can't even make it Tuesday morning to see that, check it out. It's very well done.
Have you watched it?
What's that?
Have you watched it?
I have.
It's really powerful, isn't it?
It is very powerful, right? Yeah. And it's not all sugar coated.
No.
And it shows sort of from different perspectives and so forth. So I think things like that are going to raise visibility, of our industry, and I think educate people and so forth. So Nick definitely is tried to weave into our conversations around important topics like that. So I did want to mention that. That's Tuesday morning.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually, one more piece of advice that I found is, I know the nights go long, but if you can force yourself to get up and go to breakfast in the morning, breakfast tends to be super casual, and it's a great place to go meet a couple of people and just often you can go sit down with somebody who's kind of a big name and who's eating breakfast by themselves and say, "Can I join you and pick your brain?" And that's the other thing. Don't sell. Just say, "Go learn from."
Yeah, just get to know them as people and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, and if the NIC staff can be of help, we always have the NIC badges on. We're there to be ambassadors too. So, see us with questions.
Yeah. So anyway, Lisa, thank you. Great conversation as always. Look forward to seeing you in just a little over a week. Have a great holiday weekend. I want to say thanks to Jada, who is running things behind the scenes. She just makes everything so easy. Hang on for just a quick debrief after we are off the air.
See you in Austin.